The first thing Mara noticed when she walked into Osteria Venti was the way the room smelled. Garlic and warm bread and money that had forgotten it ever had to be earned. The second thing she noticed was that her hands were shaking, not from cold. From the $43 left in her checking account, the third missed car payment, and the fact that she had worn her nicest dress to a job interview at a restaurant where the cheapest pasta cost what she made in 2 hours at the job she no longer had. She pressed her palms flat against her thighs and breathed. The trembling stopped. It usually did, if she told it to. What she didn't notice, because she was looking at the hostess, was smoothing her resume in her folder, was doing the quiet, invisible arithmetic of surviving, was the man in the corner booth who had just looked up from his phone, looked at her, and set the phone face down on the table for the first time in 6 months. His name was Luca Ferranti. He owned Osteria Venti. He owned the building it sat in, the parking structure across the street, and several other things in the city of Chicago that were not listed on any public record. And in 12 years of watching people walk through that door, he had never once stopped what he was doing to watch someone arrive. He couldn't have explained why he did now. She wasn't the kind of woman his world usually noticed. She was soft, where his world admired sharp edges. She was carrying a folder that had clearly been printed at a library copy center. She was wearing a dress that had been pressed with an iron someone had held in one place too long, leaving a faint triangle near the hem that she probably couldn't see. She was walking toward the hostess stand like every step cost something, and holding herself like none of it did. He picked up the phone, put it back down, did not look away. Her name was Mara Kozlovsky. She was 31 years old. She owed $62,400 in medical debt from a surgery the insurance had called elective 2 weeks before approving it, which her attorney had said was a strong case, which her attorney had then stopped returning her calls about. She lived in a studio apartment in Pilsen with a radiator that worked in November and a view of a parking lot that didn't. Her son Tomas was 7. His stuffed dog, a white terrier he'd named Rutabaga, was still on the pillow from when he'd left for school that morning. She would not move it when she changed the sheets. She hadn't been able to move it for 3 months. Her ex-husband's name was Daniel, and she tried not to think about him more than necessary, which was every day. She handed her resume to the hostess and smiled the smile she had taught herself. Direct, warm, no apology in it, and the hostess said someone would be with her shortly and could she wait at the bar. She could. She sat on a stool at the end of the bar, set her folder on the counter, and looked at her reflection in the dark glass behind the bottles. She looked tired. She told herself she didn't. Across the room, behind a partition of smoked glass and potted olive trees, 3 men sat at a table that was not visible from the entrance. One of them was speaking. The other 2 were not moving. The man at the head of the table, dark hair, a charcoal suit that had been made specifically for his shoulders, eyes the color of a street after rain, was listening with the expression of someone who had already decided what was going to happen and was simply allowing the presentation to finish. When it finished, he said, "Monday." One of the men started to speak again. Luca Ferranti looked at him once. The man stopped. "Monday," Luca said again and picked up his coffee. His second in command, a compact man named Ren who had a scar across his left thumb from a decision he'd made at 22 that he had not regretted, leaned slightly forward and said, in a voice below the ambient noise of the room, "The Merrick account has some exposure on the northern properties." "I know. I can have someone," I said. "I know." Luca set the cup down. His eyes moved, briefly, to the bar. To the woman sitting at the end of it, pressing the corner of a manila folder flat with her fingertip, over and over, not looking at anyone. "Who is she?" Ren followed the glance. Don't know. Someone's waiting on her. Find out. She got the interview. The floor manager, a tall woman named Beatrix, who had the energy of someone who had been disappointed by people professionally for decades and had made peace with it, sat across from her in a booth near the kitchen and asked the questions in the tone of someone going through a checklist. And Mara answered them in the tone of someone who had done this before and was not going to pretend she hadn't. Yes, she had front-of-house experience. 6 years. She was good with difficult tables. Yes, she could work weekend evenings. Her son had care covered. No, she had not left her last position under good circumstances. There had been a conflict with a manager. She would not speak badly of the place. And she had references from every position before it. Beatrix looked at her over the clipboard. What kind of conflict? He cornered me in the walk-in cooler. Mara kept her voice level. I reported it to HR. I was then scheduled for 1 shift a week for 6 weeks until I couldn't pay my bills on it and quit. Beatrix wrote something down. When can you start? Mara had just processed this information. The clean beginning of it, when the front door of Osteria Venti opened and the noise of the dining room rearranged itself slightly, the way it does when someone enters who other people have been quietly waiting for. She didn't look. She was calculating whether to ask about the start date or let Beatrix set it. She was doing the math on what 2 training shifts plus a full week at this rate meant against the car payment. She was not looking at the door, which is why she didn't see Daniel until he was 6 feet away, and by then it was too late to have a face ready. He had cut his hair since the last time she'd seen him. He was wearing a blazer she didn't recognize. He had his arm around a woman who was thin in the way that fashion magazines described as effortless, and that Mara understood, clinically, was not effortless at all. And the woman was laughing at something he'd said, and Daniel was looking at her, Mara, with an expression she had hoped she would never have to see again. The one that was affectionate and contemptuous simultaneously. The one that had taken her years to correctly identify because the affection had always arrived first. Mara, he said, as though surprised. He was not surprised. Daniel. She did not stand. He looked at her folder, at her dress, at all of it, with the slightly elevated gaze of someone calculating how far they've traveled. Interviewing? He said. Working, the correction was small and clean, and she felt it land. The woman with him was already looking away, already losing interest, already leaning into Daniel's shoulder in the way that said she had decided Mara was not worth a complete stop. Daniel watched Mara the way he always had, like he was doing her a favor by looking. You should eat something, he said. You look tired. The woman with him made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Beatrix, across the table, had gone very still. Mara looked at Daniel. She had been with him for 6 years. She had watched him leave for a woman who was not her, and then be surprised that she wasn't grateful about the manner of it. She had spent 8 months rebuilding a life on the other side of a number she couldn't say out loud without her voice going flat. She looked at him, and she felt, for one moment, the old pull of wanting to make it smaller, to let him off the hook, to smooth the embarrassment for everyone, to do what she had always done, which was to absorb the impact quietly and say something gracious, and walk away with her dignity as the only thing she'd gotten to keep. She didn't say anything gracious. We'll finish this later, Beatrix, she said, and folded her hands on top of her folder, and looked directly at Daniel until he was the one who broke the gaze. He recovered. He always recovered. He had the skill of men who never have to stay anywhere uncomfortable for long. I'm just saying. He smiled the smile. You've really let yourself go, haven't you? He said it like he was concerned. He always said things like he was concerned. The woman with him laughed once, short and bright, and Daniel was already guiding her away. already moving through the room with his hand at the small of her back, like Mara was a table they'd passed. The restaurant noise filled back in. The moment ended. Mara felt the ending of it, the specific shape of it, and breathed through it the way she had learned to breathe through things. Not shallow, not fast, but steady, the way you go through water. She had not begged. She had not flinched. She had not looked away first. In the booth against the olive trees, across the room, Ren had turned back to the table. He said something low to Luca. Luca did not respond. He was watching the woman at the booth near the kitchen, watching her sit straight in the chair, watching her fold her hands on the folder, watching her do whatever she had just done to stay together in public. With the expression of a man who had seen a great deal and was, for the first time in a long time, looking at something he recognized as real. He stood. Ren looked at him. "We're not done." "We're done," Lucas said. He straightened his jacket. Monday, he crossed the room the way he crossed every room, not fast, but with a quality of forward motion that people moved aside for without having decided to. He reached the booth near the kitchen. He looked at Beatrix. Something passed between them in a half-second that required no words. Beatrix gathered her clipboard and left. Luca sat down across from Mara Kozlowski. She looked up. He was not what she had expected. The restaurant was expensive. The man looked expensive. But his eyes were not performing anything. They were simply looking at her. "He does that often?" Luca said. She didn't ask how he knew. She said, "Does it matter?" "It does to me." He said it like it was a statement of organizational policy. "You work in my restaurant. That means whatever happens inside it is my business." Mara considered this. "I haven't been hired yet." "You have," Lucas said. "Beatrix doesn't sit with people she isn't hiring. Monday through Thursday to start." He looked at her folder. "When did you last eat today?" She blinked. The question was so specific and so outside the register of anything she had been preparing for that she answered it honestly. "Coffee this morning." He said nothing. He raised one hand, 1 inch, and a server materialized with the speed of someone who had been waiting for exactly that. "The pasta," Lucas said. "And bread. And whatever she wants to drink." "I don't need. You said you haven't eaten." His voice was not sharp. It simply did not leave room. "That's not a discussion." She looked at him. He was already looking back at his phone, as though having done something entirely unremarkable. She thought, "I don't know this man at all." She thought, "No one has spoken to me like that, like I was simply worth feeding, in longer than she could correctly remember." She ordered sparkling water. The pasta arrived. She ate. He did not make her talk. He answered 2 calls, spoke in Polish on one and something else on the other, not Italian, something she couldn't place. And when the bread was gone, he looked at her again with the clear, unperformative attention that she was coming to understand was simply how he looked at things he considered. "Monday," he said. She nodded. 6 o'clock. She nodded again. He left without looking back. She sat for a moment in the booth, listening to the restaurant reassemble itself around his absence. Then she put her folder in her bag and walked to the door and out into the Chicago October and stood on the sidewalk breathing air that tasted like diesel and lake and the very beginning of something she could not name. She noticed, walking toward the L, that the car that had been parked in the loading zone when she arrived was still there. Dark. Unremarkable. She didn't think about it. There was no reason to. She started on Monday. The training was 3 days with a server named Paloma, who moved through the room like she'd been born parallel to the floor, and who had the gift of being exactly kind enough, and no kinder. Mara learned the menu in a day, and the room in 2, and by Wednesday Beatrix was giving her tables alone. She saw Luca Ferrante 4 times that week. Each time from across the room. Each time he was in conversation, on his phone, or moving through the space with that specific quality of motion. He did not stop at her tables. He did not seek her out. Once, near the end of a Thursday shift, she was wiping down the bar station, and she looked up and he was watching her from the corridor near the kitchen. Not in a way that felt like watching, but in the way that you look at something you are used to looking at. He looked away first. She thought about that for longer than was reasonable. She was making real money. Not enough, not yet, but money that existed, that was accumulating, that could be divided against the debt and the payment and the school supplies Tomas needed in October that she had been putting off. She brought rutabaga, a small piece of focaccia, and a paper napkin on a Friday, which was a thing she knew was not rational, and did anyway, setting it beside the stuffed dog on his pillow like it was a gift left for something still present. The planted detail she hadn't understood yet was this. The dark car in the loading zone had been on her street 3 mornings in a row. She had noticed it the second morning and forgotten it by the time she got to the train. By the 3rd morning it felt like furniture. It wasn't furniture. On the 2nd Thursday of November, she was in the walk-in cooler doing inventory, a task that had specific, unbothered air to it after the last time someone had decided a walk-in cooler was an appropriate private space. When she heard Ren's voice through the interior door, the one that led to the kitchen passage. Not what he was saying, just his voice, and a name, Kozlowski, her name, her last name. She went still. The shelves were cold under her hand. She heard one more sentence, can't move on her while she's inside the building. And then, nothing. Footsteps moving away. She stood in the cooler for 14 seconds. Then she counted her bottles and came back out and finished her shift. She told herself it meant nothing. She had a common enough name. There were things in this restaurant she did not understand and had not tried to, and that was correct and appropriate, and whatever she'd heard was not about her. She almost believed it. The conversation happened at 11:43 on a Tuesday. She knew the time because she had checked her phone when Tomas fell asleep, calculating how long she could stay up and still function at the 6 o'clock the next morning. She was in the kitchen with a cup of tea when her phone rang. A number she didn't recognize. Chicago area code. She answered. "Walk away from your window," said Luca Ferrante's voice. She did, without thinking about it, stepping back into the shadow of the kitchen doorway. "The car outside," he said. "It's not mine." The cold went through her fast and specific. "Who is it?" she said. A pause. Not hesitation, something more like consideration of what she needed to know versus what was true. "Your ex-husband owes money to people who have incorrectly decided you are an easier point of leverage." His voice was even. "That is not going to happen. But until Monday, I need you to do 3 things. She didn't say anything. She was standing in the dark kitchen with her back against the wall, listening to a man explain the shape of a danger she had been walking through without knowing it, and she noticed she was not trembling. She was angry. "What 3 things?" she said. "Don't leave the apartment alone before 6 a.m. or after 10 p.m. Tomas stays in his regular school routine, nothing changes, don't pull him out. And answer when I call. That's it. That's everything." A pause. "Are you all right?" The question arrived quietly, as though it hadn't been planned. She thought about it seriously. "I'm angry," she said. "Good," he said. "That's better than afraid." She looked at the dark shape of rutabaga on the pillow across the room, her son's white stuffed dog. Still there, still on the pillow, like a thing waiting to be claimed. "Tell me the rest," she said. He did. She hadn't asked for his protection. That was the part she needed him to understand, and she told him so the next evening when he arrived at her door with Ren and two men she didn't know who fanned out into positions she recognized as deliberate, without looking like it. She told him standing in her doorway in her work shoes, still in her coat. "I know," he said. "I'm not a problem you're solving, no." He looked at her. "You're a person who is in a situation that I helped create by hiring you without anticipating the exposure. This is correction, not charity." She stayed. "In the doorway. That's a very precise distinction. I'm a precise person." He was. She had been watching him for 2 weeks and she had figured that much out. Every word he said was the one he meant. Every action was the thing he decided to do before he started doing it. He never raised his voice. He never explained himself twice. He said what was true as though truth were a material, like wood or concrete, that you built things from rather than performed. She stepped back. He came inside. Tomas was at the table with a worksheet and a red crayon. He looked up at Luca Ferrante, a man who had the room-altering quality of someone that children either immediately mistrusted or immediately calibrated to. Tomas studied him for 3 seconds and then held up the worksheet. "I got the dragon wrong," he said. "It has too many legs." Luca looked at the dragon. He pulled out the chair across from Tomas and sat down. "How many does a dragon have?" he said. 4. "But I put 6 because I forgot, and now it looks like a bug." Luca considered the dragon. Could be a bug dragon. Tomas laughed. Mara, in the kitchen making coffee she would not be able to drink until her hands stopped being cold, heard her son laugh and pressed both palms flat on the counter and breathed. Later, much later, after Tomas was asleep and the apartment was quiet, and Ren had stepped outside and it was just the two of them at her kitchen table, Luca reached into his jacket pocket and put a key on the table. Small, ordinary, the kind from a hardware store. "There's an apartment in the Northgate property," he said. "Ground floor. Second exit. Her school is 2 blocks closer." Mara looked at the key. "I can pay rent," she said. "I know you can." He did not move the key. She thought about Daniel, about the car in the loading zone, about her name, overheard in a cold room, said in a voice that had been discussing her like a resource. "Tomas liked the bug dragon," she said. Luca looked at her. Something in his face shifted, not opening, exactly, more like a window that had been shut against the weather, admitting that the weather had changed. "He's good with a crayon," Luca said. "The scales in the wings are technically incorrect, but the confidence is right." She looked at the key. "What's the book you stopped reading?" He went still. "On your desk," she said. "I saw it when I brought the invoice to your office last week. The spine is creased to page 47 and it's been closed since I started." A long silence. "My wife liked that book," he said. "She didn't get to finish it." Mara didn't say she was sorry. She held the weight of it instead, the way you hold something someone has handed you that is fragile and old. "I kept the canceled PT appointments in my phone for 4 months, she said. "After the surgery, I couldn't delete them. I kept thinking I'd reschedule." He didn't ask about the surgery. He understood, she thought, the difference between knowing something and needing to be told it. "Do you want the apartment?" he said. She picked up the key. 3 days before Monday. She was walking to the train from Tomas's school when she saw the car. Not the same car, a different one, which was worse somehow, because it meant there was more than one. It was parked at the corner of Archer and Paulina, and it was watching the school entrance in the practiced, neutral way of something that has been watching for a while. She kept walking. She did not change her pace. She pulled her phone out when she turned the corner and called Luca's number and said, "Corner of Archer and Paulina." Different car. They were watching the school. Silence. Then, "Are you still on Archer?" "I'm 2 blocks past it. Keep walking." A half beat. "Ren." She heard Ren's voice in the background, short and clear, and then the sound of something efficient beginning. "How long until the train?" Luca said. 4 minutes. I'll call you when you're on it." He paused. "You did the right thing calling." "I know," she said. She did. She had stopped doing the thing where she waited to act until she was sure someone else would endorse it. This was another small change in herself that she had noticed over the last 2 weeks, and that she intended to keep. 40 minutes later, she got a message from a number she didn't have saved. "Corner of Archer and Paulina has a new parking restriction effective this evening. The vehicle has been cited and towed. The driver has been invited to a conversation he cannot decline." Below it, a second message from Luca's number. "You're on the train?" "Yes." "Good. Stay there. I'll have someone outside the Pilsen stop." She looked out the window at the city passing in the dark and felt the strange specific relief of being someone who had called for help and had been heard. She also felt, for the first time since any of this had started, something closer to fury. Not at Luca, not at the situation, but at Daniel, who had borrowed money from people who moved like darkness, and who had, without ever calling or explaining or taking responsibility for a single consequence, made his son's school corner into a place that had to be watched. She felt the fury cleanly, without guilt, and held it there. The next morning, Luca was at her kitchen table before Tomas woke up. He had a coffee from the place on 18th. He had brought one for her, prepared exactly as she took it. Milk, no sugar, in the specific way of someone who has been paying attention so long that remembering is no longer an act. She sat across from him. "Daniel," she said. "Yes, what's happening to him?" Luca turned his cup once on the table. "His debt is being restructured. The men who believed you were leverage are being corrected. The source of the misunderstanding is being addressed through channels that will not require your involvement or testimony. That's very formal language for whatever's actually happening." "It is," he agreed. "Is he going to be hurt?" Luca looked at her. The question was serious, and he treated it as such. "No. His reputation in certain business communities is being permanently ended. His ability to access credit in those circles is being revoked. He will find that the professional relationships he has cultivated over the last 3 years are no longer available to him." A pause. "He will experience the consequences of having used you as collateral without your knowledge. Those consequences will be proportionate and institutional." She thought about the restaurant, the blazer, the woman who had laughed. "Make it specific," she said. Luca's mouth moved slightly, not quite a smile. Already done. She looked at her coffee. She thought about the canceled PT appointments she had finally deleted from her phone 2 weeks ago, on a morning when she had woken up and felt not better, but forward-facing, which was different. She thought about the key on the kitchen table, and the book on the desk stopped at page 47. "Tomas is going to need a bigger bed," she said, "at the new apartment." Luca nodded once. "I'll handle it. I'll pay for it," she said. "But thank you." He looked at her. That window again, the thing that was not quite opening, but was no longer entirely shut. "Do you always work this hard?" he said. The question surprised her. It was the only question he had asked all month, she realized. The only time in any conversation he had slipped out of declarative and into wondering. She thought about the PT appointments, the focaccia on the pillow, The drill of steady breathing that she had turned into a practice, and then into a self. "I don't know what else to do," she said. "That's not the same as hard. It's just the only option I know how to run." He looked at her for a long moment. "That is exactly what I mean," he said. On Saturday, Daniel Kozlovsky was informed by 3 separate financial institutions that his accounts had been flagged for irregularities during an audit already in progress. His business license for the property management company he had incorporated 6 months ago was suspended pending review by an agency he had not known was watching him. The man who had been his protection in certain conversations, a name, a phone number, an implied ceiling, called to inform him, briefly, that he was no longer available for those conversations. Daniel sat in his apartment on the north side and made 7 calls. 2 were answered. None of them helped. He was experiencing, for the first time in a long time, the feeling of a floor that was no longer where he had left it. He did not understand why. He had a very strong suspicion about who. He also understood, with the specific clarity of a man who has been fully and silently outmaneuvered, that there was nothing he could do about it, and that this was the point. He sat with that for a long time. She moved into the Northgate apartment on a Sunday in November, with Tomas carrying rutabaga under one arm and complaining cheerfully about the elevator speed. The apartment had 2 rooms and a kitchen that got afternoon light and a second exit through the laundry room that she did not tell Tomas about because there was no reason to. The bed in his room was new, with a blue comforter, and it was the right size, and he climbed into it at 7:30 that night and looked at the ceiling with the satisfied expression of someone who has arrived somewhere they intend to remain. She stood in the doorway and watched him. Rutabaga was on the pillow. In the new place, in the new light, the stuffed dog looked exactly as it had always looked. White, slightly matted, present. She hadn't moved it when she packed. She moved it on the other end, lifting it from the Pilsen pillow, carrying it across the city in her arms, setting it on the new one. That was different. She went to the kitchen and poured a glass of water and stood at the window that looked out at a small courtyard where someone had planted something in November, and she could not tell yet what it was. She thought, "I am in a new apartment." She thought, "I am not afraid right now." She thought, "I don't know what this is, with this man, but I am not walking into it without my eyes open, and I am not walking away from it because it's complicated. Because my whole life has been complicated, and I know the difference now between complicated and wrong." Luca arrived at 8, as she had said was all right. He had a small bag from the grocery store, bread, apples, coffee, milk, which he set on the counter without ceremony. She thought he remembered. She thought, he always remembers. She thought, the book is still on the desk at page 47, and I am going to ask him one day if he wants to finish it, and I will mean something specific by that question, and he will know exactly what I mean. He stood at the kitchen counter and looked at the window and the courtyard and the plants she couldn't identify. "Garlic," he said. "Someone planted garlic. It comes up in May." She looked at him. "You know what's in the courtyard?" "I know what's in every building I own." He looked at her. "Usually that's about infrastructure." "Usually," she said. He looked out the window. She stood beside him. It was quiet. The city made its specific sounds, a train, someone's music, the particular low hum of urban life continuing, and they stood in it, together in the kitchen of her new apartment, not saying anything, which was its own kind of language. "May," she said. "May," he agreed. Through the window, the planted thing in the courtyard waited. The city moved around them. Tomas's light was out. Rutabaga was on the pillow, in the new room, in the new place. She was still there. She had chosen to be. Mara had been invisible in a lot of rooms. She had spent 6 years in a marriage that redefined her as a problem to be managed, and another year rebuilding herself on the other side of it. She had sat at a bar in her pressed dress with her library, printed resume, and been seen first as a target, and then, in the same hour, as a person. That's the thing nobody tells you about the quiet ones. They're not waiting to be discovered. They know who they are. They're waiting for a room that can hold it. When she left that restaurant the first night, Luca's coffee, the pasta, the bread, she had walked to the L station in the October dark, and she had known, without quite being able to say it, something just shifted. Not because a man looked at her, because for the first time in longer than she could name, someone had looked at what she was holding and decided it mattered. That's not the same as rescue. That's something rarer. If you recognized something in Mara, the quiet strength, the way she held herself together in the rooms that were designed to make her fall apart, tell me in the comments, when did you first know she wasn't going to leave? Was it the moment she folded her hands on the folder? The soup she didn't ask for? Or the night she called him from the corner of Archer and Paulina and said different car, like someone who had decided to stop absorbing and start acting? I want to know which moment it was for you. Drop it below. If this is the kind of story you come here for, the ones where the quiet one turns out to be the person everyone underestimated, follow along. There's a new one every day. I write them for people who know the difference between difficult and wrong, and I think you know exactly what I mean. One more thing, Tomasz knows more about what happened that November than his mother realizes. He sees things. He noticed the car 3 weeks before she did. His story is next.